it's kind of really funny because every now and then when I run into some folks after a seminar and they come up for a hug and I hug them and they all burst into tears and I thought, shit, what am I
What have I
doing
done?
to them? What am I doing to them? Is this anyway? We finally worked it out that it's a digital relationship, right?
Mm,
Because I've been in their home for some of them for
mm.
nearly 20 years. And the relief of actually seeing someone who helped you work out how crappy everything was, I've got it now. And apparently, sometimes you cry when Taylor Swift hugs you. So, whatever.
Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
same thing.
They tell me, what would Maggie do? They all say that to me. I look at my husband, he goes, what would Maggie do? I love that because usually they go, eat chocolate, go outside, hide in the bedroom. Right? It's actually that's kind of sweet. If that's the legacy I leave, guys, I'm really
Oh, it's lovely.
stoked.
I don't know what it is, but even just knowing that we were getting to have this conversation with you, I was immediately feeling quite reassured. I was like, it's going to be
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
Maggie's
Maggie's
Yeah.
coming to
here.
help.
Maggie's here.
Maggie's
Yeah, because
here to help.
seriously, no one really has got it, right? But the pressure on you mums today, that's nuts, right? You're supposed to be perfect looking, perfect bodies, perfect friggin' master chef kitchens, amazing looking houses, perfect freaking children. And I'm going, no, none of that. If you've
No,
got kids, they'll shift your shit around.
they
Um,
do relentlessly.
and they make mess. What?
Yeah, well, I like to look at it that a stagnant house is boring, right? Like
I
things
love that.
things should be moved
I
around.
love it.
It's a living
I
home.
can still remember the boys when their mates would come in the house sometimes, especially in the early teen years, and their mates come from houses that are unbelievably tidy with a lot of screaming. And they walk in and go, wow, your house is kind of, and my boys say, relaxed. We
Good
don't use the
answer.
word untidy. Mum's a bit funny about untidy. She just calls it relaxed. That was why I created the lucky dip bed because I
Mm.
realized one day I'm taking an hour to fold up clothes that no kid in this house gives a damn that it's folded up. So I left it all on a single bed. It's all clean. Find your own. It's called a lucky dip bed. And they used to dive into it like it was a new competition. But it was an hour I got back for me,
Mm.
like the most significant mental health step I had. And every now and then I run into people who say, we've got a lucky dip bed. And I
They are the
thought,
best.
yeah, see,
That's brilliant because that is
Mm.
that is the real obstacle with the
it
laundry.
is.
Washing it fine, drying it fine, folding and putting away, absolutely insurmountable.
Why is it so hard?
Well, there's so much and it never stops. You know how you think you're going to get in front as a mother? Well, you never do because they're already wearing the neck load of washing. And if you've got boys, they were already done a skiddy on their jock. So you never get in front. As soon as you drop that crap and you just try and keep up with what is, knowing that some days you're going to nail it and some days it's just not. And that's actually what raising humans is actually, about.
Yeah. It's so hard to let go. To let
The
go
pressure
of the
on women, come on,
expectations.
we're comparing and despairing as 3-year-old girls in daycare now when I did the girlhood book. Fat shaming's happening in daycare at 3-year-old girls because, I'm comparing you to me and you're not good enough. And I'm thinking, what hope do we have as a mother?
Oh,
We are our own worst enemy.
so
We
How
true.
do we fix it?
Well, I'll give you the good news, and that is the older you get, the less you give a toss. Right?
Well,
Over
that's
40,
great.
you're a lot kinder to your body. Over 50, even better, right? And by 60, man, it's just this wonderful liberation. You might look worse, but you feel better.
It's what they say. Women can have it all, but maybe just not all at the same time. You
No,
know?
exactly. Whenever I see a photo of me as a 16-year-old girl, I've got this long straight hair, and I look at her and think, God, she's actually quite gorgeous. And I think, I hated her. I thought she was ugly. She wasn't thin enough. She had giant big feet. What the hell? But every single one of us does that. I did that without social media and without seeing photos that were digitally altered. Plus, we didn't have magazines anyway because I lived on a farm. And I was doing that anyway. So you can imagine how much harder it is today,
Oh,
Yeah.
for our girls and for you guys as well. Like Insta just compared despair.
Maggie, shall we actually do an intro
Okay,
for you?
let's do.
Yeah. Because I feel like we've already started the podcast
Hey,
and we
can
haven't
we
even
meet for a
introduced who
can
you
we meet
are.
for a coffee or something when I'm in New Zealand? Because
Oh,
I think we
yeah,
need to have a big chat.
Yes.
100%. We will be there with bells on. Kia ora and welcome to another episode of Untidy podcast. My name is Hannah Davison. I'm the co-founder and author of the My Big Moments children's books. I'm also a mother to two children, aged 11 and 9, and I'm here with my glorious co-host.
Oh, stop. Thank you so much. Matilda Green. I am a content creator, author, and mum of three little people. They are almost 5, just turned 3, and 7 months. So it's great. We're covering a lot of ranges of age with this podcast. But today's episode is a very special one as we have with us someone who we both greatly admire and, in fact, are regularly reassured by, and that is the one and only Maggie Dent. So, although Maggie doesn't need an introduction, we also want to give her a thorough one to try to convey the depth and breadth of her wisdom. Maggie is one of Australia and New Zealand's favourite parenting authors and educators, known as the Queen of Common Sense, which I love, by the way. As a mother of 4 sons and a grandmother, she is an advocate for the healthy, common sense raising of children in order to strengthen families and communities. Her experience includes teaching, counselling, working in palliative care, funeral services, and suicide prevention. Maggie's books, I'm sure some of you have probably got many of her books already. They include Girlhood, Parental as Anything, and she has a podcast of the same name, From Boys to Men and Mothering Our Boys. But your newest book, Maggie, is called Help Me Help My Teen, and it's available at Paper Plus and Mighty Ape, as well as an ebook and audiobook. It's hot off the press, and we're
Hot.
really excited to talk to you all about how we can help our kids navigate some of the really big stuff that we've already been discussing that can come along with adolescence. But before we do, welcome to Untidy, Maggie.
Hey, I have 2 Kiwi friends of mine, right? They've been my girlfriends for 40 years. And every now and then I have to send one of them back home to New Zealand because she loses her accent. And
Oh,
I absolutely love the Kiwi accent. And then when I'm there for a week, I get back over here and I'm going six and I'm going cuds, and I've actually picked it up, and it takes me a week. I love it.
oh,
Oh,
that's lovely. Well, I'm glad you love it because I'm not a
Oh,
big
come
fan of the
on.
Kiwi
It's one
accent.
of the most
Cubs,
beautiful
caution
places
shots.
on earth.
Oh,
the,
yes, the country,
the
yes.
country.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the accent, you know,
Yeah, no,
it's all right.
seriously is. It's totally cool, and I love it because you know where you're from.
We certainly do. And we love that we can give you the full immersion
Yeah,
experience
full.
when you're here so that you actually take some of it back
I
with
love it.
you.
I seriously love it.
Oh, it's so good. Before we dive into all the things we want to cover today, and spoiler, there's going to be a lot, so strap in. Can you define what adolescence really is and what's happening with our kids in that process
Yeah.
of transitioning from child to adult?
It's a transition that's happened for humans ever since time began. So at some point, Mother Nature decides, okay, we're going to change this child into an adult. And that journey means all sorts of things have to change because at some point that has to become a responsible adult, but also one capable of breeding. Because what Mother Nature's most worried about are we going to sustain the species? And so what we know is in traditional kinship communities, that journey was quite short. Like you actually were allowed to be a kid till 10 or something. And then by about 16, you were having kids, you were in the family, you were growing up, boys were out there doing what they had to do. So it was this long. We know puberty is starting earlier and earlier, and there's a whole lot of reasons why that's happening. And some of our girls are menstruating at 8. So that everything's happening a little earlier. But instead of it being 16 to 18, the westernized way of raising children basically means they're not as capable or resilient as previous, those other kids were fighting to survive, which means that we now know the brain doesn't finish its most significant development to be a mature brain. Originally, it was 22 to 23 for girls because girls are cognitively and socially and emotionally ahead of boys from preschool, adolescence to adulthood. The boys, it was around 27 to 28, but new research is showing that massive immersion in gaming and on tech stuff is actually delaying the growth of that. So technically, it's around 30 that we really can see that they've got the capacity to have a brain that can make great decisions most of the time. None of us are perfect. Come on, ladies, we aren't. But that's what the research is now showing us. So, in actual fact, the journey's a lot longer. And I think one of the mistakes we can make is thinking our kids are meant to leave home around 18. They can drink, they can drive, they're supposed to be mature and capable. One of the biggest risk windows is actually 18 to 23 because often they do, if they can leave home or they become even more dependent with their car, they're at even more risk of fatal incidents that can end their lives. So, hope I'm not terrifying everybody, but it is a journey that I think everyone has been conditioned to dread, and I want to stop that because I was a high school teacher for 15 years and I counseled them, but I also raised well, actually, I raised half the community in my house. If you see it through a different lens and embrace the great gifts it brings, you can absolutely enjoy this journey. And it doesn't have to be a real nightmare that everyone, dooms and glooms. I surveyed 2,000 teens for the book. And they really get sick of everyone kind of looking at them like, oh God, teenagers. So I think we really need to step up and put a slightly different lens on how we view this fascinating time of transformation in our lives that, we all had bumpy moments. Am I right there? And am I right there, Matilda?
100%.
Absolutely.
We made lousy choices and that we come through it. And that's our job, is to help our kids kind of come alongside them to help them come out into the world okay.
Yeah. Do you know, I'm strangely quite excited about my kids going through
Oh,
adolescence. Like, I think
fascinating
it gets more and more
conversation.
fun. Yeah, the conversations are great. This is off topic, but we'll go there anyway. My son's 11 and they're in the States at the moment with their dad. And we had a wee video chat and he was like, would you rather, because we sometimes play Would You Rather around the dinner table, just to reconnect, would you rather have poos that came out your nose or snot that came out your bum? And I was like,
Yep.
oh, great.
I
It
think the
is.
other
It's lovely.
thing you can be excited about, there are some boys, and I think they're more the lamb boys than the rooster boys. They are so excited when they find their first pube. They'll run in and just up the sack and show you as their mother how proud they are of their first pube. So be prepared for those joyous moments of
Oh, it's
celebration.
it's a beautiful thing. In layman's terms,
Yep.
can we just recap on like what actually happens
Yeah.
in the brain during that time of change in adolescence? Because I think it's always quite helpful to understand that physically there is a lot going on.
Well, Hannah, this is the most important thing, that if we can understand that no teen gets out of bed wanting to be disrespectful, untidy, forgetful, like something's happening to them they didn't ask to happen. I think it really helps us to be more compassionate. Okay, so the first thing the brain does, it goes, holy heck, we need to trim this one up. So what we need to do is trim up the stuff they're not using, and there's a lot of stuff up there that children form through all sorts of things. So in the pruning process, which is the first part, accidentally the brain can prune too much. Now, there's no question there is gender differences around memory capacity and organization. So therefore our boys are obviously more, shall we say, challenged by this because they already were forgetful. Now they get twice as forgetful. You'll have a wardrobe, whereas probably they could put it away before. But I had a boy tell me one day, "Can I tell you why I have my clothes all over my floor?" And I said, "No, mate, go for it." And he says, "Well, my mum puts it away in the cupboard and I can't find anything. When it's on the
Mm.
floor, I can find it." So when we see it as a sign of disrespect and untidiness, sometimes there's a coping strategy that's hidden under it. Okay, so forgetfulness, disorganization. As a high school teacher, oh my God, the number of times I go, "What is it today? Is it test today?"
I've only been talking about it every day for 2 weeks, but yes,
Yeah, yeah,
today.
that's it. Oh, homework. Oh, that can make them feel really like dumb. Even the brightest of our boys and some of our girls can be just more disorganized. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is that the brain doesn't just trim, it's remodeling. So the next thing it knows is that window, if you're in a traditional kinship community, is that the girls had to learn really fast how to make sure they could take care of babies and look after things and feed people because otherwise they died. The boys had to go and become men really quick to kill dangerous stuff. If you didn't learn quick, you'd be dead. So it grows all sorts of excessive dendrites, which is the feathery bit at the end of the axon between neurons. Don't worry about it, but it grows billions of them, and which is exciting because even though this is a window where a lot of teens hate themselves and have self loathing, it is a window of enormous potential. They can pick up a new language, a musical instrument, if they're engaged in something they love and they throw themselves into it in this window, it's under 15, they improve out of sight. This is where my basketball skills went to a whole big level, right? Because I love basketball. So, can you see that it's a huge window of potential? But this window is also a huge potential of disaster because you can become addicted faster than any other time in your life. So, anything you do, whether it's smoking, vaping, drinking alcohol, watching pornography, being disrespectful, it suddenly becomes you're normal. So this is why this is a window of potentially great or bad things. So that's a window that parents need to be really mindful of, which is why you need to be the rails on the bridge as much as possible till 16. And then in that window, the brain is constantly making myelin. Myelin's a fatty white substance that goes on the brain that slows our thinking down and allows us to think better. So that means we make better decisions, we plan for the future, we can have more empathy, we don't make the same mistake twice, right? That's the myelin that's gradually growing that takes until the mid 20s to be able to complete. But at
Makes
the
sense.
same time, the limbic brain says, Hallelujah, I'm coming to this party. And it decides to grow a lot. That's the emotional brain, which means that they get far more emotional. All emotions are way more intense. And I share the story in the book about the 16-year-old boy came into my English class after his maths class. And 10 minutes in, suddenly just stood up, kicked his desk, kicked the chair, went over and punched a brick wall, and then threw himself out the room. Everyone in the room went, "What the heck?" Anyway, when I got a drink of water and when he was de-escalating him and sat next to him, and he basically had failed his maths test. So it took him 20 minutes to absolutely flip out. And I write a lot about understanding the tipping point in our teens and helping them navigate the tipping point. It's not a bad kid, but guess what we do in most of our schools? We punish that boy, right? Instead of using it as a teaching opportunity. And then on top of that, unfortunately, the neurochemical in the brain that's great for impulse control, it's called GABA, it gets turned off. So therefore, they're far more impulsive, far more wired for risk, far more wired to make really dumb decisions, especially if they want to stay bonded in a friendship group that's in that same space. And then the last one, probably that is linked to the brain, is particularly in boys, but I've seen it in some girls, a significant drop in empathy. So they just don't, I don't care. See if I care. And they actually don't care. It doesn't last. But what I'm saying, that's the initial stage. And it's all going on in the brain, which at the same time is creating change, which will trigger stress in their body because they know something's different, right? And then there's one other thing for boys. Ah, it it accidentally comes in and trims a little bit too much off the process about speaking articulately. So that monosyllabic stuff is not because they've suddenly decided not to open their mouth. Their brain has pruned too much off the articulation part of the brain. And it will normally come back online about 18, but oh, gee. So he didn't ask for any of that. She didn't ask for any of these intense big moods that she can't get out of. This is part of the navigation of a journey full of change.
Oh gosh, so there's a lot going on, and
There's a lot
and
going on.
and what I find interesting, Maggie, is like the mainstream school system. I don't think they really understand that. Like, I was actually talking about this with someone recently about how with homework and tests, and like if you come to school and you know that you haven't done your homework, or you know that you're behind on something, you're already coming to school on the back foot,
Absolutely.
and because you're going to get in trouble, you don't want to be there, you know you're going to get a detention, and it feels really crap. And then you come in, you think, I haven't done something, I'm going to get in trouble, I don't want to be here, maybe I'm going to wag and try and avoid it, then the trouble's going to get worse, and then everyone's going to roll their eyes at me, and it's sort of that punishment
Yeah.
style just seems to not really
Ah,
be.
if it's one of the things that we need to change as soon as possible, is that
Mm.
behaviorism really worked for rats. And we're still doing that. Like it was so deeply embedded into our behavior systems in our schools and our high schools. When I started teaching, I actually knew intuitively that it wouldn't get the results I wanted. The class of 14-year-olds that I had co ed. You know, there were times I'd be watching boys just scratching my head going, oh my God, it's like a room full of Neanderthal apes. Like they're all trying to slap each other and grope and hugging, pushing, shoving. And I could see no malice in it. There was no malice to hurt, and I realized I'd grown up with brothers. Kind of I knew it was a way of connecting with others. But also there were times that I noticed they were walking around my room and I'd go, "Hey mate, what you doing?" And he goes, "I'm walking, miss." I said, "What, you're going to get something?" He said, "No." I said, "What do you do?" He said, "Just walking." And then I noticed there'd be a couple of others. So I worked it out intuitively, thank goodness, that often male brains run out of what we call dopamine, which is the engagement neurochemical, and walking is a way of kicking it back up. So I introduced a lot of brain breaks into my classrooms and right the way through, right through to the last year, that, years 8 to 12. And what I noticed was no girl goes backwards, it was more brain breaks, but the whole class benefits. And then I decided I'm not going to treat these humans in my room as though they are less beings. I've got kids in my class who are illiterate in my English classroom. I can imagine how that's been for the last 8 years of their schooling journey. It's not going to have shame in my classroom. So I tell them right at the beginning, you all matter to me, and my job is to help you grow and be better at the end of this year. So you all matter. The bright ones and the ones who struggle, you all matter. And all of a sudden, I didn't have any behavior problems. So when we come with that place that says the more safe they feel in our environments, and that's in our homes and our classrooms, the more they turn up with exactly what you said, with more energy to be able to participate and to learn. And I think that's a really big thing we have to use going forward. How I'm trying to challenge that, obviously, I'm targeting my book on parents because the school system I've been tackling for years and I don't seem to have made an enormous difference, but
Bit of a juggernaut.
a bit of a juggernaut. But I want parents to see it through a different lens. So they do get detention for forgetting stuff. And I feel that's okay because there's rules and systems in our world. It's not a personal attack on who you are. It's the same as when I hand out an assessment. I used to have this little speech. Now, you're going to get your assessment back. The mark on this piece of paper is only a mark due to the work you did 3 days ago. It is not a reflection of my relationship with you or whether I like you or I don't like you. And after about 6 months, they start going, so when you get this, you're going to, this is not a reflection on. But I wanted it anchored into their psyche, right? That you're going to have moments of failure in high school or as a teenager. It doesn't define who you are. And I think sometimes I want parents not to jump on the opposite side and want to whinge and complain about our school system when it holds boundaries that everyone has to kind of learn to manage. It's how they do it. If they do it with shame, shouting, belittling, well, I'm sorry, that's totally non-acceptable. You're going to trigger them into a fight or fight situation because that's exactly what they'll do. But if we come with it with firmness and yet kindness or compassion, they accept it. They actually do accept it and go, yeah, yeah, no, no, I did forget. Yep, yep, no, you're right. And that's why we're going to head forward on how do I deal with some of those hot moments as a parent that allows my kid to know that I've got their back. I might be horrendously disappointed in this moment, but I also know it's kind of what happens because of all the things that they're going to learn about what goes on.
And well, speaking of learnings, you have parented 4 boys through adolescence. And so, it's different being a teacher and being the mother.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah. Or the, consultant or whatever. But so
yeah.
what were your main learnings from bringing up your boys?
Well, I was just glad I was a high school teacher before I did it, to be really honest. So I actually had a pretty good sense of where I was going. I'm also part boy. I was a girl who raised on a farm and I wasn't really into frilly dresses and girl stuff. So it was kind of my heaven, really. Plus, I love basketball. They love basketball. We love the beach. We were an outgoing family. I had very different personalities in amongst my boys. And I had to work out how and it sounds a little bit lodgy, I use the theory with younger boys too. If you imagine your heart's a love cup, when do you know it's full? What fills it up, right? Because I want to know what fills it up because we often assume that if I treat all four the same, they'll all feel equally as loved and safe. No, right? So one of mine, it definitely, he loves words of appreciation. You need to thank him if he's done the dishwasher or he's going to not want to do it again. The other one doesn't care, right? The other one wants to know, did I do a good job? Another one just wants quality time. So he'll hang around the kitchen while I'm getting dinner ready, just hanging around and chatting to me or like one on one in the kitchen while the others aren't there. The other one's kind of like, he'd like you to think you thought of me like a gift, but sometimes not a real gift. Like I went on a conference once and when I came home, one hung onto my leg because that was a safe touch one. The quality timer said, so how many people were on the plane? What did you eat? And when you got there, you wanted everything that happened before. The third one just wandered through and said, did you get me anything? So I'm going to say that's one of the things I wanted to know that each of my boys felt, not just heard my words, but felt my love. And that meant at times when they were revolting, I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to shame because that was my childhood wound. That I would give them time to let, as I call it, let the glitter settle. And then at some point, Maybe 20 minutes later, I'd go down to that boy's door and knock on the door, always knock and wait 20 seconds, and then put a cup of Milo or cocoa in there and then a biscuit and shove the dog in and then shut the door. So I don't go down and say, "You were so disrespectful to me." I don't want that language. I go down and I don't say a word. But what have I done? I've given and shown that we are still okay. And 9 times out of 10, like half an hour later around dinner time, I'll get a bump on the arm or I'll get, "Sorry, mum." Right? And I think we've got to learn. And it's the same, girls is the same. They can hold on to stuff far more intensely. The boys tend to forget quite quickly and forgive more quickly. Girls will hold on to stuff. Oh, that's why I was kind of glad I had boys in a certain sense, but then they don't have erect penises behaving badly at breakfast. So it's all a little bit of each.
Oh gosh, yeah, that is quite the thing to deal with.
Yeah.
But I think we can all agree that teenagers today are dealing with issues that are still quite new. So it can be hard to fully understand their experience, I think, for a lot of parents. And you say in some ways that they have it more challenging. What makes you say that?
Oh, there's no question that the digital natives we are raising today have been exposed to stuff that we would never have seen. So the first thing is a 24/7 news cycle where instantly there's a bomb blowing up in Ukraine. We will see it. We will see it with bodies everywhere. We will see car accidents that happen in their local. We will see it played over and over. And even on news articles, they often replay the same video in the background of the announcer 3 times. Every single time that impacts immature brains, our children and our teens, that the world is full of all this unsafe, awful stuff. The second stuff is on their socials, whether it's TikTok or it's Insta or it's, whatever they're into. They can be exposed to the most horrendous pornography, the most horrendous, like live beheadings, streamed suicides, things that no person is going to handle well, but an immature brain, you start building up an inner fear and a sense of, I don't know if I want to be here. And then on top of that, teens before the digital age were bullied. They were bullied face to face. The cyberbullying, as you know, is just tipping everything into a different space. And we have children, teens who die by suicide because of the absolute anguish. And quite often their parents don't even know it's happening. And that's another big quandary. They probably have loving parents, but they're getting crushed by this stuff. And then that other layer is the sextortion that's happening at the moment, where particularly boys, 97% of the sextortion victims are boys aged 14 to 17. They think a teenage girl is messaging them and showing interest. Well, holy heck, if they're heterosexual, that is just going to be the number one thing they're yearning for because they're sexually awakening too. That's exactly what's supposed to happen, sexual attraction and arousal. Anyway, so they send a dick pic. They send a photo and then immediately it turns into, right, now we've got that, we're going to share it, you need to pay us money. And so we've had boys who are dying by suicide as a consequence of this as well. Can you see that we didn't live in this sort of a world? Right? And then the other thing that's happened, which is really sad because we're talking to each other, thankfully, to a digital world. I run my business through my digital world. I run classes, like, all sorts of things. We know that it's not all bad. However, it takes a lot of parents' times. When I was teaching, I didn't have to go and do 100 emails or work on stuff. I didn't get work outside work. I did prep work, which was all under my control. But we know that people who work are often jumping on to get work emails out the road so they can be ahead the next day. So that steals time with that connection with our kids. We're on the phone trying to book their lunch or their check what time soccer is, and then there's a WhatsApp group for that, and the school's contacting you, and you're on your phone, which means you're not present. You're not
Mm.
present. And we damn well know that human connectedness is the number one quality that we need at any age for our healthy well-being. So again, we're already been not there as much, and then we think they're going to be fine, and then we throw them out into a world that's full of more harm, and they probably don't feel as safe coming to us. It's really complex, which is kind of why when I tackled the big questions in the second part of the book, what to do, that I researched really carefully where you would go to find the best information so you don't end up doom scrolling for 15 hours and get wrong information. this is the most reputable information about vaping or sexual violence, or is my child, confused about their gender identity, or I found pills in their bag, so that parents can go and get exactly the information that is accurate so they can come alongside their teen and say, let's read this stuff and look at this stuff. And then you can see as you go forward how you might deal with this challenge in your life and what choices you might make. Now you know the full scope of what it's about rather than following something online that has been distorted.
Well, that's the thing. It can be really hard to know because everyone's got an opinion. And I feel like I'm just constantly served things online about parenting and whatnot. And everyone is very confident about what I should do. And there are so many different opinions and
It's
places
it.
to get information. So that's really helpful, actually, just
Oh,
so
no,
parents
and
can have
also
a
that
place,
place is
person.
you know your child best. So when you get the information, you are the absolute best person who comes to help your child figure something out, because remember, fixing it and rescuing them from it in the teen years doesn't prepare them for adulthood. Yep. However, knowing that they've got your back, regardless of what disasters happened, as they search the facts, then you can see that it's going to be a decision that in your home fits with your values, your expectations. Because, like I keep saying, every now and then someone reaches out to me and says, where do I send my son to school in Melbourne? I go, I don't know your son. I don't know Melbourne, right? You are it. However, you've got to get good information. That's our job, is finding that. And it's interesting because one of the mums contacted me after From Boys to Men, where she handed the chapter about brain changes to her 14-year-old son, and he read it, got up, dropped the book, and said, yeah, would have been great, mum, to know about that before it happened. And I think that's kind of what we have to realize. You can't just hope school's doing it. No, schools don't teach about what's going on in your adolescent journey. They'll teach you how to put a condom on a carrot or a banana, and they'll talk about consent, but they're not talking about sexual urges that are really quite powerful, that are normal and nothing to be ashamed of, but what we do with those urges, right? In our own bedroom, in the privacy of our own home.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we've
Yeah,
got to talk about.
exactly. Because I guess a lot of kids are kind of going in blind with that stuff because, like you say, they learn about the impractical things, but do they talk about porn in school and the dangers of that and how that doesn't represent a normal, healthy sex life? You know, that
Yeah, but
some of the images or videos that they'll be exposed to at such a young age.
oh, look, I think Chantel Contos, when she just put that message out, has anyone out there been experienced sexual violence from private boys in private schools in Sydney? And it just blew up. I think there was a new report just in the last couple of days, that it's incredibly common, right? At much higher levels. And our domestic violence figures in Australia are absolutely appalling at the moment. And we know that whole sense of entitlement, and what porn teaches you is that you as the male are entitled to do whatever you like, that this is what we want to teach our kids. I know this sounds weird, and I can just see Hannah's about to faint, is I want to tell them one day, I want you to have fantastic sex. I
Mm,
really do. I want you to have that great experience of sharing your body with another person who you genuinely like or feel safe with, but you're both supposed to be enjoying it. And it's about a mutual kind of, is this okay? Is that good? And what? And then it can be great, right? And even if they're cringing, I do say that conversation should happen in the car while you're doing 110 Ks an hour so they can't get out. But it also says porn's not going to give you that. You know what? And I want to make it as difficult as possible. And of course, I vent on so much in the book about how big tech can just change algorithms tomorrow, and our kids wouldn't see this harmful content. And yet they, they keep letting it happen.
oh,
And they can change it tomorrow. And it's interesting because that whole misogynistic stuff that's out there that boys are being marinated in, it, of course, is only going towards teen boys. It's not going towards anyone else. And it's a highly influential window up to 15 that we can change a boy or a girl positively or negatively. And it can anchor into their psyche and become their perception. And that is what we're dealing with at the moment.
What about the pros? The pros for being a teenager in
Oh,
today's world, do you
so
know?
many, so many. So guess what? They're actually drinking way less than we did. So they don't abuse alcohol half as much. And many are completely abstaining, like something like 22%. They're not smoking. And until we had vaping, which of course is not their fault again, we also know there's less delinquent and violent behaviour. So even though we hear it, and in Australia they keep talking about the youth crime, well, in actual fact, it's a tiny percentage who are getting an awful lot of publicity, right? It's
Mm.
still a small percentage. And one of the reasons is we don't know if it's just COVID or the fact that they do most of their connecting online is most of them aren't out in groups hanging around doing dumb stuff. And I have spoken to some boys, teen boys, who've told me that they prefer to game on weekends at night rather than go out with their mates because they know that some of their mates really like to do dumb stuff and they don't want to be in that position. So they're
Yeah.
choosing to stay in their bedroom and game. And I feel, see, nobody's listening to those ones. And at the moment, there's been some surveys about teens who, because we've got a bit of a push in Australia, let's push the age of socials to 16, not 13.
Love it.
And when they're asking in classrooms of teenagers from 12 to 18, 100% of kids are going, please. So they know
Wow.
that this is an environment that, even though it's got pluses, it's causing them more angst in an already stressful journey of their life. And that if they were 16, they could handle it better. And that is exactly right. We need to make sure that we focus on the ones who are doing great things. And there are teens just everywhere doing amazing things. Like I live on the coast south of Sydney. And this summer, three teenage boys saved a whole family from drowning. When they rescued them, they were really incredibly humble. They just leapt straight in. They knew what they were doing. They are part of a surf lifesaving club, so therefore they do those things, but they are capable. And then yesterday, amazing story in Australia here in Brisbane, a whole bus full of students coming from a high school, and the bus driver had a heart attack, and a 15-year-old girl leapt up, took his foot off the accelerator, got the steering wheel, and steered it away from traffic up onto a medium strip and basically saved
Saved
lives.
everyone. Oh my
Wow.
goodness.
15-year-old girl. And I'm going to say that they're everywhere. But our job is to keep on reminding them that they're capable of so much more, so much earlier, that we need to keep giving them the skills. Another one is I'm really big about educating them going to parties that, because they want to go to parties because their friends are there and all that. I kept saying, okay, so if you do, what if? Okay, so what if some gate crashers come into the party? What would you do? And we let them tell us. And 9 times out of 10, they've actually got all the answers. They don't need a lecture, but they will take on board one more of your suggestions. So one of mine was, what would you do if a friend of yours collapses and it's not just gone to sleep, but look, the potential to be an alcoholic coma that can kill? I said, "Yeah, okay, do you know what to do?" So I used to basically tell them that, put them in a recovery position, check their tongues forward, call the ambulance. Now, I've had 3 emails over the years of teenagers who are now at university who heard me talking, who did exactly that. And when the paramedic turned around and said, "Who'd called us?" and a kid's put their hand up, sometimes a girl, sometimes a boy, you've just saved their life. 2 minutes. They would have had 2 minutes and they were going to be dead. We need to empower them with skills to save lives, not just doom and gloom on them.
Maggie, it's so important to be able to listen to our kids. And, you were saying as part of your research, you've listened to 2,000 teens for your latest book. So, what else do teens want parents to know?
Well, basically, what I kind of have already suggested is they really being shouted at and shamed and shooted on. They don't like being shooted on. No, none of us like being shooted on either. They want you to check in, but not too much, right? And there's times they want you to stop fixing things so they can learn how to fix them themselves. See all the wisdom in their beautiful voices. It was so good. And also they wanted you to kind of be able to love them when they can't love themselves. I felt that was just a heart wrencher, right? I just wanted you to know that you can do that for me. There were so many in the survey who said their parents had just been amazing. Like they've held the safe space. They have found people to help them when things were really tough. They've told them that your marks do not define you as a human. Oh, because school pressure comes up in all the research of how it's contributing to poor mental health, that we've become so driven by your grades and the rest of your life depends on it. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. And one of my last blogs was why I wanted to shift the focus, particularly for teen boys, to well-being before grades, because there's so much more. They're not as focused and easily contained as girls. And so once again, the really concerning bit in there was that when you put stress on me, I've already got a million things I'm trying to do. When they talk about the pressures that they're playing sport, working part-time, studying hard, trying to keep up with their friends on socials, trying to look okay, eh,
Mm.
that's that's nuts, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely nuts. Like there's almost too much, and it's okay for the parents to come along and reassure them that they could drop one of those things and still be okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I
Oh,
think it was
that's
beautiful to see that so many just thank their parents for hanging in on this
yeah.
bumpy ride.
That's so good to hear because one of the pressures that we're feeling as parents is like, are we doing enough? Are we doing a good enough job? Are we being effective? All of the things that we're learning on Instagram about how to be a good parent, is it working? I think it's reassuring for people to hear those voices as
Yeah.
well.
The
Mm.
awkward conversations, Hannah.
Mm. Well, that's what
It
I wanted
needs
to
to
talk
come from
about.
parents. It
Yes.
needs to come from parents. Like we go, "Oh my god, I hope school's covering that." No,
No.
no, you have to. And it's not one conversation. I remember a parent came out to me and said, "Oh, my son's 14, so when do I have the sex talk?" And I went, "Oh, he probably knows way more
It's a
than
bit
you
late,
already."
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and we sow all those seeds early. We drop little bits. And the awkward conversations are, how do we speak to others? A lot of our boys are who come from loving, high valued homes. Parents are pulling their hair out because when they're gaming in a multiplayer game, their language is coming out that is not okay in their house. And they want to know, what do I do? And that's exactly what's happening in that game. And if their friends are doing it, they've got to go to that place because, and I haven't touched on that, the biological wiring for adolescents is to develop connections outside of parents so they can leave home. So they are wired to do more and follow what their friends are doing for validation and connection than their parents. Does that make sense? Like, so it's okay. But at the same time, we're still going to have a quiet chat. We're not going to punish you. We need you to make sure you do your best. And there are some words that sound like really bad swear words, aren't they? So let's have a look at what ones you could use that could help you fit and also fit in our home.
Oh, that makes total sense. And I think something that maybe we fall into the trap of is when a teenager comes to you with a problem, and to an adult it might sound really insignificant, like someone kissed a boy that you like, or something that is like, oh, it'll be right, don't worry about it, who cares? But I think, like, as a teen, it's understanding that their world and the context around their world is very different to yours, and that is actually a really big deal, and it helps them feel respected if they're heard and listened to, rather
Yeah,
than just like, oh god, that's just silly,
so
teenager
good,
stuff.
Matilda. And so often all we have to do is say, what do you reckon about that?
Yeah,
What did that make you feel? It's a bit
yeah.
like when they've come to you with that kind of thing and say, so what are your thoughts going forward? What's your plan?
Mm.
It's really hard because we know in our head that our plan is obviously superior because we've already done it
Plan is
and
the
made
right
the
one.
mistake. But of course we're going, no. So that could be plan A. And if plan A doesn't work, can I offer a plan B? Or what could be another? And I'm going to say one big thing. Our teens actually have a very wise part within them, the same as all of us. I call it the inner compass. There is a higher self inside our teens, even though you can't, you don't see it often. So quite often when they'd come to me, big thing, like my oldest came to me just after he started upper school, year 11 in Australia, said, oh, no, I think I want to do a trade. It's too hard. I just want to bail. And of course, every part of me knew we could handle it. Anyway, but I also knew, I thought, oh, okay, so give that some thought. With Easter's coming up, let's have a chat after Easter and see how we go, and we'll work forward what you want to do, right? Anyway, after Easter, I said, so what were your thoughts about, doing a trade rather than sticking with it? He said, no, I've got a handle on it now. So what happens when you leave them, especially even just sleeping overnight or leaving a couple of days, that wise part within often comes up and becomes a part of their thought process without anything we need to say. And they'll often come. One of mine also wanted to go to a party with 400 teenagers in a paddock with no adults. And I had said no
What's
parties.
the worst that could happen?
Yeah. I said no parties till 16. He was 16. So basically, I need to make sure he gets there and gets home safely. And I don't provide any alcohol, and then he's able to go. Anyway, everything inside me goes going, what? No adults. Okay. I was just dropping a few hits. I left it and I left it. Every part of me, I was awake both nights thinking I really need to stop this. Anyway, came out the third day and said, you know what? I reckon it's going to be lame. And I said, you can have your mates over here. It was in the days of DVDs. We can have some DVDs and a pizza night. And that's exactly what he came out with. He said, Mum, I think I'll have some mates over for a pizza night and DVDs.
Oh, thank God.
Oh, God.
Did you see the difference though?
Yeah.
I needed him to keep on pondering the two things.
Just ruminate over that for a bit, for all of us.
Oh, the self-control, Maggie, is astounding. Like, we do want them to know that we think that they are capable and feel empowered to make those decisions. But one thing I did want to ask you was, sometimes we know that there's something eating away at our kid, and we know we need to open up maybe what's going to be a tricky conversation. What are some ways that we can get them to open up to us? Because sometimes it's not
Beautiful.
always the right moment, or they're not
Yeah.
in the mood, or they feel shut down.
Oh, deer in the headlight. I've been attacked.
Must
But
run.
I'm ready to talk now.
Okay. And so the second part of the book, when I look at all those big topics, I go very specifically through not only do you need to cool your glitter and find your inner calm, is you got to work out some ways that you lead towards the conversation. So let's just say I want a conversation about watching porn or something like that. I want that conversation. So I might just say a day or two before, even though I have actually seen evidence on his laptop, right? So I know it. And what's our first reaction? Angry,
Yeah.
panic,
Why didn't you tell me about this?
which is the worst fear. So we now know, no, hang on, Maggie says, right, cool, right, Jets. So we might drop a seed, and the seed might be as you're driving the car. I just read an article yesterday about how it's about 80% of 15-year-olds have watched porn, and most of it's really hardcore. Do you reckon that's right? There'll be like a mic drop. And then you don't even need to keep going in the conversation. You've sown a seed. And then when you get around to it, then we're going to just basically create a time that can we have a bit of, I just got something I want to have a chat to you about. So therefore we set up a soft landing. We connect with them, whatever term of endearment. Do we get a snack? It's got to be a space that's away from anyone else in the house. And it's just, we're really grateful. I just want to have a bit of a chat, right? And then that's how we lead into it gently. And we also have to start with another question that might be like, so, Bud, I am a little bit concerned that lots of boys your age are watching porn. And I want us to have a chat. If that's happening for your friends, so you go to your friends first before you point the finger at him and let him talk, let him talk. And your job is to listen and stay actually quiet, because the quieter you are, the more likely they're going to give you a bit more information. Because really, they think they're waiting for the lecture, but it's not coming this time. Right? Okay, so my concerns, yeah, I've got some concerns around it. So, how about we look at some great sites that explore how we develop sexuality, how we can do other things, and we can actually use that word with the M, like self pleasuring and masturbation's great. However, when we're leading towards wanting to interact with another, it's not just sexual intercourse, is it? There's so many arousals, places of the body that can be a part of a sexual experience. And if they're cringing like heck, there's a whole section in the book, because there's some fabulous places online where they can go and have a look themselves that is far more liberal. And you must remember, today's teens are so desensitized to what would upset us. And if you go to look at some of the Nordic or the Scandinavian sites that they educate teenagers about sex, they actually have teenagers blatantly naked saying, these are small titties and boobies. They're big ones, right? They're just showing you, right? No shame. And they also talk about getting erections and all sorts of other things. And so they can see it. If they're watching horrible porn, why don't we put something in the middle that sort of like shows naked bodies doing healthy things? Then we change the conversation. So once again, it's just us coming alongside them. I know it's a confusing time, and like I said, I really want you to one day to enjoy this with another human. I just want you to know that what's happening with porn is usually degrading to women. Yep, and it's often hurts. The shift is today too that sexual intercourse is like the last cab on the rank, right? Oral sex and anal sex all happen before even kissing sometimes. So again, we have to have honest conversations about that. We really do. But for you to have that conversation, you need to be well informed, which is why, we put all these links up to signs so that you know exactly the incidence of girls turning up in emergency departments with anal tears is disturbingly high. And
Oh
that
my
can be their
gosh.
first sexual experience. That isn't what we want for our daughters. It is also not what we want for our sons to think that is exactly what I have to do. No, you don't have to choke anybody. You don't have to slap anybody to enjoy the beautiful arousals that can come within bodies when they share intimacy. It's about
Oh,
intimacy.
God, it's so much more complicated these days. But your book covers lots of different scenarios for parents, from vaping to problematic gaming or phone use, to what to do if your teen comes home really drunk, if you get worried about their body image, or they have disordered eating, self harming, or that they're suicidal. So, really big stuff,
Big one.
and things that we definitely want a guidebook for and some help around. But regardless of the situation, is there some guidance parents should follow when they realize that there really might be a serious problem?
Yeah. So what we tend to do is panic. I don't know if you've ever lost a child in the supermarket for 2 minutes, but what the first thing you do is get angry at them. So we're wired to get angry first when there's something that frightens us. And then the second thing is we're going to panic to fix it or stop it or rescue them from it, or we go into complete denial and hope it just goes away. And so none of those are terribly effective. But the fact that you're aware that is a human behavior. So if you come across one of these things, just bottom line is I've got to go and find my calm. I've got to find my calm and be the big safe person, because what our teens need exactly the same as our toddlers. They need a safe base to land on, right? And that's why if it's not a parent, it's a lighthouse figure. And I became a lighthouse figure for so many teens. I didn't even realize that's what I was doing. And that there were times I would have a short, awkward conversation in a classroom because nobody else was. And so I think that's the most important thing, is that maintaining that sense of connection. It doesn't matter what, because it's a bumpy ride, whether you've got a teenage girl who's in such a dark mood that can last for ages. We still got to bounce up every day with as much joy as we can, knowing this is all part of this big long journey. So I think the first thing is that knowing you are the best person, and that there probably isn't a counselor, a psychologist, or anybody available for quite some time. And the reason I got the idea to write the book was I did a podcast with Parental as Anything about suicide. And I was speaking to Professor Matt Coleman, who's a specialist psychiatrist for youth. And he said, Maggie, I just wish we could empower parents to know they can do so much more. So that means that even if your teen has a counsellor, they see them once a week, once a fortnight, you have them 99% of the time. And the actions you do every day that reassure them that they're loved, they're safe, that we're bigger than this, that their friends are welcome in your home, that I'm going to dig out the ice cream when I see you being crabby. We're going to hide and we're going to dig out the ice cream together in the dark in the bedroom, or we're going to bake biscuits or cupcakes at 11 o'clock at night, right? But we're going to sit down and watch The Lion King for the 7,000th time because you've always loved it, eating popcorn together. It is the moments of human connectedness with their parents that means that there's a chance that if something really bad happens, their first thought is, I want you to call my mum or my dad. Not the first thought is, don't tell my parents. That can be life changing. And we can all do that.
Absolutely. There are so many situations I think of in my own adolescent years where I got into way worse trouble than I could have if I had just called mum or dad and asked for help. And they probably would have helped. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's that feeling of like, "Oh, I don't want to lecture. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to disappoint anyone. So
Can you
I'm
see
just
how
going
I'm
to,
trying to shift a whole mindset that says, you know, don't
yes.
come hard because that actually is going to damage the one thing that is really the biggest thing we know that will keep them healthy and alive. And that is their relationship to you as a safe grown up. Untethered teens are most at risk of everything in life. Remember how hard toddlers are to be able to love when they're throwing tantrums and screaming and not going to sleep and drawing on the walls? Well, it's just a
Yes.
toddler on steroids with a body now that's capable of so many other things.
Well, speaking of tantrums, actually, we have a listener question. How do you manage a teen who uses fists to express big feelings? How do we prevent them punching people while not shutting down that associated emotion?
Oh, and that's a big one. I presume it's a boy. So, what tends to happen with big emotions, they come out slightly differently for girls and boys. When our amygdala is fired up, the emotional center of the brain for girls, it tends to be the second center in the brain that gets fired up is the word center. So that's why we vent really quickly and come out with. So what happens for the males? The amygdala is fired up, and then the next part of the body is fired up. And then the very later, much later, they can access the word center, which is why there's a slightly different way we handle some of the things with girls and boys. So, what happens to boys who have also been conditioned again that vulnerable feelings is a sign of weakness? You can't be a real man if you cry or you feel really sad. You know, we're really doing everything we can to deconstruct these social norms that aren't helpful, especially in intimate relationships. But what do they cover it with? Anger. All right. So, what happens with anger when it's in the body? It's massively hot and there's a lot of energy with it. So, it comes out through physicality, whether it's kicking. And so, what that boy did in my classroom, it came out through physicality. And if you've got one that's really into punching, bottom line is that basically there's only a couple of ways that that can be managed. One, you have a punching bag outside your house in the fresh air, somewhere on a veranda, and that's where it goes. They punch the hell out of a punching bag in the fresh air. There's two things going on there. Nature's naturally restorative, and the energy moves into a punching bag. The second one that works particularly with high volatile, big masculine rooster boys is you run it into the earth. So they run and they pound their feet as hard as they can into the earth for as long as it takes until they get this. There's a sigh. It's like when we've had a big cry, we go, that's the nervous system resetting. So again, it's only problematic when the fists come out at others. And of course, it happens in our classrooms, it happens on buses, it happens in our social world because these boys haven't been given the emotional coaching when they were younger boys. What do I do when I feel this rage? And as I said, rage can be covering so many more vulnerable things underneath that.
What's a parent going to do if those fists are coming at them?
Oh, everything you can to stop it. Get the biggest pillow you can and hold it up in front of you and say, no, that's not okay. Hitting humans isn't okay. But in that moment, they're not going to hear you because they've flipped their lid. As we know, when you've flipped your lid, you can't hear logic, you can't hear voices. You do everything you can to be able to protect yourself, you know. And I've heard of teen boys who've had the office locked where their game console is because they wouldn't get off. And they've used an axe to chop a door down. That is the potential volatility of male rage in the teenage years when they can't get what they want.
God.
Crikey Dickens.
You mentioned lighthouses before. So can you just explain a little bit about what a lighthouse is?
So they're significant adult allies. Okay, so they're people who literally shine a light into a teen's life, regardless. So they can be grandparents. And in the survey from boys to men, it was a significant number were grandparents. It was beautiful to see. Always a lot of teachers. So the big hearted teachers, absolutely. Sometimes coaches, but sometimes neighbors, definitely aunts and uncles. So whenever I've got a room full of people and I'm talking about teenagers, I say, are you a lighthouse for a teenager? If you're not, step up because sometimes That's the person they turn to. They've got to have someone they can turn to when they've crashed the car or they've, ended up somewhere in trouble. If there's not someone because they're not feeling safe enough with their parents, that's a very dangerous space for them to be. So there's significant figures that just, are, like I said, they've got their back. Non-judgmental support, exactly what we've said before, which is kind of why this book is for parents and for lighthouse figures.
Mm, that's so good. One thing that plays on my mind a lot, and I'm sure I won't be alone in this, is wondering if I'm connecting enough with my kids. Like, because life is so busy between doing all the admin at home and work and family, it often feels like you're moving all the time. There's not enough space just to slow down and really be with them. Apart from the sort of, or even in the day to day, what are some really effective things we can do to reinforce strong connections, like even in like micro moments while we're handling that big juggle?
Yeah, the first thing is having a conversation with your kids and saying, "Am I doing an okay job here?" And mums find that easy to ask, probably sometimes for dads. With dads, I often say, go and feed your son and then say, "Look, mate, I want to be a better dad," because my dad wasn't super good. There's a part of me that thinks I'm not being the dad I want to be, but so can you give me three things I do good and three things I don't do good so I can work on it? And then you leave it a week and the boy comes back and he's got his three things for his dad and immediately he'll know what that is. But the micro connections, once again, each kid has got slightly different ones. And that is sometimes it's a one-on-one connection that can be after you pick them up from soccer or something. You swing by and you get some hot chips and you just park and look out at the ocean or something. So we scoff it down. We pretend that no one in the family knows you're doing this, right? You know, lecture. And I think it's the rituals in the family. So mine, we had some crazy rituals that I know bonded the boys a lot. We often, because they didn't play sport on a Sunday, it was PJ day. We stayed in our pajamas as long as possible, all of us, the whole house. But we always had a big fry up on Sunday mornings. It wasn't too early, so they could sleep in if they wanted to, because teens can often need more sleep. That was a big fry up, and we often then we'd still be in our jammies, and then we'd still hang around like sloths all day. It was just this great feeling. Some days they'd all get home, and it was a bit, let's just cook pancakes for afternoon tea and do a really big lot of them and have dinner a bit later. But it was like, where are these moments we do as family that bring light and joy? And the other thing was for me, because mine all love the ocean. It's quite often I picked them up at high school and I already had their surfboards in the back of the car. I had a big thing of food and we just hit the beach. And I sit there and freeze my, what's off waiting for them to come out. But what comes out are boys full of joy, full of life, full of you're the best mum ever stuff. And my house is like a bomb's hit it, right? But and sometimes that night, I didn't have a delicious dinner with broccoli. We cooked as many toasted ham, cheese, and tomato sandwiches as you like, right? And they're happy with that because they got to go to the beach, right? I
They've
just
been thought of.
yeah, right? And then they're starving, which means they all fight over the toaster. "I'm nearly dead here." Yeah.
I love that. One of the things you talk about in the book is anxiety, which is not just a problem for teens, but for all ages, it seems these days. So are our kids more stressed and anxious now, or are we just more aware of it? What would you
Yeah.
say?
Good question, Matilda. I actually think it's a bit of both. I think it is a more stressful world because of all those things we shared early on. I do think the immediacy and having constantly connected to a phone puts a lot of pressure on us. And then less time outside, we know it naturally restores us. And then on top of that, I think we've overdone the whole mental health stuff. And I think a lot of even some grown-ups think that if you're not happy all the time, you obviously got a mental disorder. I don't think we validate that we all have moody days, we all have grumpy days, we all have days we feel like things suck. We all have obstacles we've got to deal with and overcome ourselves. So I think we're less resilient at dealing with emotional upsets. And one of the things I loved is Lisa DeMore is an amazing teen psychologist in America, and she talks about having the right feeling in the right context at the right time, and then having the ability to manage it without causing harm and bringing relief. Brilliant, right? So sometimes when they're in a situation, so they've got exams or they're transitioning into a new year, of course you're meant to feel anxious. The amygdala is wired for looking for threats. So I think when we have conversations with our teens going, yeah, I get really anxious when I've got something big coming up at work, and we normalize that anxiety is a way of us staying alive. However, when it becomes problematic is it stops us doing the things that we want to do or we could be doing or we possibly should be doing. And I think you've got to get onto it as early as possible and have those conversations about what could help you be a little bit braver in this moment. Because one of the most common things is we just do avoidance. Well, there's two things. The first thing is we minimalize it and go, don't be ridiculous. Everything's going to be fine. But we're not validating that for them in that moment, it's not fine and it's causing them a somatic discomfort in their body, which is a sign that the amygdala is going, oh, I think there's a threat to my life. So we might sit down and say, I don't think this is going to be life threatening, but I do feel I can honor it and absolutely say that makes a lot of sense. So, what steps might you do? And that's why I'm really concerned about the increase in school refusal because it starts with school reluctance. That if we get to that point and are able to build some steps that return them and identify what caused that reaction, we probably wouldn't have as many, but we just don't have enough people to support our kids in that space. And there is more aggression and violence in a lot of our schools. So you can see why that there's a few things going on in there. So I think it's important to use that and to normalize it and to validate it, but also you as grown-ups, talk about your stress levels. If you're about to lose it at your kids, go, whoa, gee, I've just noticed how I'm really fired up. And I use the emotional barometer as a metaphor in the book that, whoa, I think I'm getting to my tipping point. I'm just going to go in the bedroom for a while and calm myself down and lock the door. And hopefully you've got some chocolate in there. Take some breaths and regroup because you come out calmer. What are you showing your kids? Right? I'm showing them that we all get fired up at times. We all get upset. We all get anxious. But what can I do? And how powerful are three big breaths? Just start doing it. Like at the end of the day, our modeling can really influence our kids. But I think we need to recognize and have honest conversations that, to be really honest, around exam time, anxiety can fire us up and make the brain more efficient and more focused to deliver better results. Same for grand finals. It gives more energy in the body to deliver a better thing. Well, they don't get that story enough. So I think we need to see it's not always problematic. It can actually be a gift, and that, in life, it's just one of the things we'll learn to live with.
Right. So that's about sort of being able to identify the difference between an acceptable level of anxiety that might be healthy and useful in that moment as opposed to an unhealthy level of anxiety.
Yeah, but also preparing them that transition, starting high school, starting anything, any transitions, any moment of a friendship drama will trigger anxiety because there's a chance you'll be excluded, right? So that's a massive threat to our sense of a social species. So you can see why friendship dramas, particularly for girls, can cause so much anxiety and stress that they can't even focus on their schoolwork or anything else. And that's completely valid. So being heard in those moments, really heard when those things are going on is really helpful. But also as a parent, knowing that my job is not to fix this, is to help my daughter figure out a way around this. And just saying go and play with someone else doesn't actually always work. Because to go and play with a new person, you've got to have a lot of energy, don't you? And you got to feel good. But when you're already stressed, that's the last thing that's going to work, right? And I think that sometimes that's when our advice we throw at our kids, our teens, can sound like we're not listening, which is why listening and nodding and going, yeah, well, yeah, that's hard. Yeah, that'd be hard for me. Yeah. That makes them feel really seen and heard in that moment.
Mm. And we need to be asking the questions and trusting that they can actually give us the answers and that they
Yes.
actually intrinsically know and have that and a compass, as you say, and that inner wisdom to be able to even help direct us as parents. But I think we're sometimes so stuck in that thought of like, well, we
Yeah.
need to have the answers and we need to guide them through it. And
Ah,
instead of
and if
actually,
you got the confident roostery kind of kids, seriously, you're going to have to kind of you let them make some mistakes because natural consequences are how our roosters learn best, right? They want to push up against boundaries. And yet we're our lambs. Sometimes we do a little bit of nudging. I don't want to go to school camp. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that because they're just not as fierce and brave. but how do we help them step forward with bravery? I'll tell you, so my 12-year-old son, the oldest, who's a very big rooster, he's now a lawyer in a massive law firm. I think he was practicing his whole childhood. He said, we were starting to get a bit narky. And I had that conversation with him. I said, we don't seem to be getting on as well. Is there something going down? And is there something I need to know? He said, yeah, I've noticed you've been trying to control me. I went,
Wow.
I said,
Right.
can you give me a couple of specific examples? Now, there were such subtle manipulation attempts, but he picked them up. And I said, so what do you want me to do? He said, don't do it, mum. So I said, well, what does that mean? So let me make my own choices. I
You
said,
can see
mate,
why he's a good lawyer.
you're only 12, right? How do you know enough? He said, I need to make my own choices and my own mistakes and I'll learn from it. And I went, oh, okay. All right. So can I give you any feedback? He said, if I ask. Now it's crazy, but I did. I just let him make any decision. Obviously there's my rules, so he didn't go to part. All that sort of stuff was still in place. But when he wanted to make a decision, he made it. So he's gone to year 11 and he's come home and said, oh, so one day a week I'm going to be doing work experience in an accounting firm. And I went, oh, I didn't know you could do that. He said, no, they hadn't done it before, but I went to student services and told him it'd be a really good idea because I'm doing accounting and economics. And so they set it up for me. Anyway, my friend was the student services coordinator and I talked to him and he said, yeah, good idea. Can you see once again, there is a potential when we can step back a little that allows them to grow in their decision making for themselves because they're trying to work out. Remember, identity searching is huge in this window. Having more autonomy is a big part of adolescence. And we always say, no, you're not going to do that because that could happen. And sometimes we're just going to go, okay, so and this is a favorite line, with every choice there's a consequence. Some of them are good, some of them not so good. Are you prepared for that? If you're prepared for that and you've slept on it and you've thought about it, then I'm prepared to stand beside you. Let's see what
Fantastic.
happens.
Oh, I
So
love
good.
that. That's really powerful, actually.
Now, the good news for everybody is that you are, in fact, coming to visit us in New Zealand. You're coming to Auckland on the 14th of September with a conference you've been running around Australia since 2009 for parents of kids under 12 called Calming Today's Anxious Kids. And we do actually have a double pass to give away. It's a one-day conference. So everyone just keep an eye on the socials because we'll be getting that out, which is a
Yeah,
very exciting prize. So it's all about guiding children through managing fear, worry, and anxiety.
yeah.
And you mentioned the pandemic in your advertisement for that conference. So, how much worse do you see it has become since the pandemic?
Oh, there's no question that drop in kids' capacity to develop core social and emotional learning experiences, which really it was 2.5 years, right? Where we also marinated them in fear, parents'
And
fear,
and screens, a
neighborhood
lot of
fear,
screens.
and a lot of screens to cope. So it takes time, like everything is habitual behavior. We've got to peel that back. But what did they miss? They missed some key windows. I mean, right through to the final year students who miss their graduations and miss their formals and all those sorts of things. That causes a kind of challenge as well. So we are noticing it. There's no question we've had more kids turning up with anxiety kind of challenges. So Dr. Kayleen Henderson is a child psychiatrist. So she's just such a rocket. She just explains things in such a beautiful common sense way. And she talks about how we build our kids' resilience by helping them just enough. I love it. It's such a goodie that I jump on. And mine's a lot more about some real things you can do and also a bit for teachers that, can weave into classrooms. And then Alison Davies, it's beautiful that we've actually got an autistic woman with ADHD who explains how it was for her as a child. And it just gives this whole new framework for us to understand how anxiety, happens for many of our neurodivergent children and how for us to see it through a different lens and how we can recognize that supporting them to build the structures that make it easier for them to navigate our world because it's really hard being in a school environment that expects everyone to have the same neurotype. And she's a big, warm, gorgeous human. I got one other piece of exciting news. I'm also going to run a Mothering Our Boys night, guys, in Auckland.
Oh,
Amazing.
Woo!
Oh my
Going
goodness,
to
I'm
be
Oh,
good
announced
at that.
very shortly. So check my socials, and then I'm sure my beautiful Carmen will flick it across to you. We just had so many other inquiries around the edges. I thought, let's go to the funniest one. It's like a comedy act, really, but it's very
oh,
helpful.
I love it. I love it. I can't wait. So, Maggie, before we let you go, because we've had you for longer than we said we would, um, but can you just share just some top tips you can give parents for creating calmer homes and calmer kids?
The very first thing is what are you doing for your own levels of calmness? Because we know kids are influenced by their parents, right? And I keep saying to mums, what's on your to-do list that you could flick off? You don't have to have the tidiest house on earth, or you don't have to have just this whole expectation. Every now and then, the mental load that women carry makes us less happy in the home environment. So your kids really can have some nights we have toasted ham, cheese, and tomato sandwich, or we have porridge with Greek yogurt and berries. Like at the end of the day, some nights we just need to know it's just going to be enough food. We're not going to have to go to that high bar. The second one is we know that too many sensory things overload homes. So noises and too many screens, like the big screens, TVs are huge. And if there's a couple of them on or there's noise, it actually really can move the nervous system into a state of agitation. And I also like to think that the slower you walk and the more often you take deep breaths, the more that you create gaps between things. And I want you to have a look at how much extracurricular activity really works for your family. Just because everyone else is doing it, what works for your family? Do you need an afternoon we just go home and veg? Like I keep looking at it, we keep thinking it's going to be great, but it's a bit like Goldilocks. Sometimes it's too much, sometimes probably not enough, and then there's a sweet spot, and sometimes different children in your family cope better. But I think every now and then having an honest conversation around the dining table that says, "Do you know what? I think everything's got a bit tense. We've got a bit shouty, and I wonder if you've got some ideas on how we can calm the home down." Bring your kids on board. Bring them on board because they get stressed too. And my last tip is anyone who've got kids under 4. You know what? Some mornings you're going to be late with love. You got everything sorted, and then there's a random poo,
Yeah.
or they find they want something, or they're melted down because of a sibling thing. And that doesn't mean you're a lousy parent or your kids are not. That's actually welcome to parenting. So rather than get fired up in that moment, because I'm going to think people are going to judge me if I'm late, take a deep breath. And Maggie would say, be late with love because you've got
I
little
really like
kids.
that.
Be late with love and soothe your kids, cool the jets at home, and say, we're just going to be a little bit late today. And when you get in the car, put on a favorite song you can all sing together. And then get there and just wink at the early childhood educator and say, yep, random poo, late with love. Because you know what? They've been there. This is what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Welcome
Yeah.
to parenting.
Oh God, I love that so much because nobody likes being rushed, right? It's horrible.
And when you're little, you got no concept of time anyway.
No. My daughter used to say to me, Mum, we are always waiting for you. Why can't you wait for me? And I'm like, oh,
Oof.
not
And a
wrong.
and a toddler dawdle is exactly the speed a toddler needs to walk. How long do they take to get from the car to the front door some days, right?
It's incredible. It is incredible.
We do have 2 listener questions.
Yes.
Can we do them quick fire? Because I
Of
know we
course
need
you
to
can.
let you go. Okay.
Of course
The
you can.
first is how to nurture empathy and emotional intelligence for our preschool boys.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a tricky one because it isn't wired into some of them. They're often usually the rooster boys. And one of my first things that I would suggest you get a guinea pig. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous, but when they have something small that they have to learn to be gentle with and they have to learn to stroke, it actually does build a neural pathway of tenderness and softness. The poor guinea pig might cop it a bit to start with. And then, I mean, you can read the picture books that talk about empathy, but boys don't tend to get the messages. They get it from real touching experiences. And then hopefully the guinea pig will die and then they'll learn about death and dying and funerals. So it's a really good, yeah, there you go.
Just don't get a guinea pig if you have a Jack Russell.
No,
It's an accident waiting to
no, that
happen.
Then
one, yeah, then you
that's
learn
trauma.
about death earlier.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
we've got a book for that at My Big Moment, so don't worry, we've got you covered. The other one is my 2 boys are close in age, 5 and 3 years old, and best buds, but so much physical fighting. Any tips?
All right. Very first thing is that physicality for boys is often a sign of affection, right? They don't say, "Would you like to come and play with my Tonka truck?" No, they jump on you. They want to wrestle you. They want to sit on your head or fart in your face. It's actually how boys do it. So your challenge is most of the time this is actually coming from a normal, healthy space of boys. They actually don't want to jump on or wrestle with boys they don't like. However, every now and then they're going to hurt each other. So your favorite line is, "I don't think you're meant to hurt your brother." If you see it's deliberate and he lines them up and gives them a kick, that's totally different. But even if they jump on each other from the top bunk and nearly hurt each other, there was not usually an intention to cause harm. There is just an intention to cause connection. And we're constantly coaching in other ways, how we do safe high fives, how we can say, "No, ouch, that hurts. Where's the line?" We can do all of that. But trust me, with a house of four boys, I took my cup of tea outside some days because it was a wrestling feast or it was a something that I didn't understand, and they've all survived, and they actually really like each other, and they're their best mates.
Oh, that's
Oh, that's
beautiful. Well,
great.
Maggie, we are just beyond grateful that you could join us here on Untidy Podcast. And if anyone wants more of Maggie, and obviously everybody will, you can follow Maggie at Maggie Dent Author on Instagram. You have two podcasts called Parental as Anything and The Good Enough Dad. And you can find her books
MaggieDent.com.
maggiedent.com for events which are coming, and books at Paper Plus and Mighty Ape. But please support the wonderful
Ah,
gift that Maggie is giving to our whānau and communities.
thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Thank
Maggie.
you,
Kia ora.
Maggie. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Untidy. If you enjoyed it, we would really love your help to support us to continue to make the show. Things you can do that make a huge difference is subscribing to the show so you never miss an episode. You can also leave us a little 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And of course, please share this podcast with your mates. It means that we can continue to build this community, keep putting out untidy episodes, and just keep doing what we love to do.
And don't forget to check out mybigmoments.com for kids' books that make your tricky job of parenting just a whole lot easier. Untidy listeners get a discount at checkout, so just pop in Untidy for 10% off your order when you check out. And lastly, we would like to thank all of the good people that make this podcast possible: Flicker Williams and Joe Rocker at My Big Moments for the beautiful artwork and design, and Maxine London Creative for editing this episode. Thank you so much, guys. Take care. We'll see you soon. Mā te wā.